update on the start of school, the superintendent goals for 2012-2013, public participation, FY 2014 budget timetable, and information sharing and other. So are we off to a good start, off and running?
Yeah, and I want to mention that Teresa Knapp is here from the Patch, and Chris had mentioned at the last meeting, trying to do something to communicate, and she was real quick to come in and meet with me, and we had a good conversation about trying to do some things to work in cooperation with the Patch. So where she made the effort to be here tonight, I thought I'd mention it to you.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my perception is we're off to a good start. My schedule worked out well this year, and I really, right from the first day, I've had a lot of time to be out in the buildings and talking to kids and just seeing how things are operating, and it seems to, be going very smoothly, besides the sense that I had when we talked at the last meeting of the general sense of the condition of things and, how I thought things were organized to actually see things in action. I've had a good chance to talk to a lot of parents and kids. So I've had very little that's come forward to me. I think the bus services and
So far,
all
so
that
good.
are functioning well. At this point, my sense is things have gone pretty well.
As far as the bus, to expand on that just a little bit, and hopefully I won't put a hex on it, but this is the 9th year that I've been here for the opening of school, and we've had the fewest bus issues with, overcrowding and missed stops and things of that nature. And while it certainly hasn't yet been perfect, it's been far and away the least problems that I've experienced in the 9 years I've been here.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a tribute to your organization and communication.
I would love to be able to say thank you very much, but that may have a small piece of it, and a little bit of it is luck, and we'll take both.
But a lot of hard work. I mean, I was over at the, I had some downtime tonight in between the meeting, not having the executive session, and I just kind of wandered around a little bit, and, being in the middle school, it was around 6 o'clock, and the nurse was still in her office, doing work that needed to get done organizationally. So, that's just one example of, I think, what goes on with the staff. I mean, they're, very dedicated people, and, we certainly benefit from, all of the staff and the effort they put in, so.
Okay. That brings us to the superintendent goals for 2012 and 2013.
As in every year, what I try to do is have a conversation with you about some things that, I'm thinking about as major initiatives. It's not the exhaustive list of things that we'll be working on, but things that I think are important to move forward. So this is more just a discussion to let you know some of the things that I've been thinking about, and hopefully some of them won't feel like surprises. If they're important things, then hopefully you've had the sense that they are things that are important to me and important things in the district. So not necessarily in order of importance, things that I think are important to keep moving forward. One is technology. We had that presentation last week with the iPad initiative, and I actually had a long meeting with Nat again today about the meetings that he's conducting with students and parents, which have been very well received and are going well. But the whole idea of, I think we're continuing to see, and even from the survey data that we conducted, there's a sense that technology is very important in our lives, and trying to continue to explore how can we make sure that kids are ready to use it as a tool that's very important in life, but also to figure out the ways that you can, in a meaningful way, adapt it for instructional purposes, I think is really an important, critical issue for us. And, that complexity, which we're seeing really, firsthand through this pilot of all the different issues that are there, whether it's security or making it purposeful, for instruction, down to just, getting it to work in a way that, really supports the educational mission, of what teachers are trying to do in the classroom is is incredibly complex. So, I think the amount of staff training that's going to be required, and the amount of work that we need to do to properly implement this is something that's really important. And, I think it's the future. And sorting that out in a way that's going to work in Medfield, I think, is really an important goal. So that was one thing. Dale, as a facility issue, we're, as you know, we're in relatively good shape with all of our buildings, with the exception of Dale. And we did file that SOI last year, which we still haven't had a response on, which I actually think is okay. I think, and Jim can probably chime in on this a little bit in terms of some of the work that he's doing with the town, but, I'm not an alarmist on it as an issue. I think it's something that, is not going to happen immediately, but I think for the long-term benefit of not just the educational system in Medfield, but also for the town, having a facility there that is in good shape for the future. We need to continue to keep this on the burner and try to figure out the thoughtful way to fit it into what I think is a number of issues that the town is facing, so that it can be approached from a thoughtful perspective, but at the same time. And I guess the other major change that's being promulgated in this system is the actual use of forms of data. So whether it's actual performance data of kids, either through MCAS, which is mentioned, in terms of growth scale that's mentioned in the document, but also other measures of performance that are in the form of common assessments that are developed in district and then applied. And also using student work, that basically teachers could present student work as part of the, performance evaluation, so project-based, type of work and activity. All of this is subject to negotiation. Okay, so there is no requirement that this model be the system, but a lot of work went into at the state level with the Superintendent's Association and Principals Associations and the teachers' unions, as well as the Commissioner of Education and the Department of Education, into trying to bring a lot of people to the table and work through a lot of difficult conversations and come up with something that's a model. And even in the last pages of the one that's the teacher language, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they talk about they'll be rolling out in June of 13. So there are a lot of things there that are still unsettled around issues like, well, what are those local measures going to look like? And a number of other, what I would consider still pretty important factors, how to use student feedback, how to use staff feedback in terms of an evaluation model. So there are other aspects of this that are included and envisioned in the model that they haven't even rolled out yet in terms of, some different aspects of it. So there's still more to come, even in terms of how this is all, going to move forward. What I'd say to you is that the current system has many aspects of what's in this. So there are teacher plans right now. There are teachers that are identified for improvement right now.
You're talking about within Medfield?
Yep, within our current system. There are, a variety of standards that are in place by different criteria. So there are different examples of different performance areas that do have specific criteria that are used in evaluations. There are, as you read through this, you'll see a lot of deadlines, a lot of, meeting this, doing this by this date, and, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of that in the current process. I would say that the difference in this is it is more defined. I would say that the rubric model is more concrete, in terms of expected outcome. I would say that This system contemplates a lot shorter time period for remediation through improvement plans of someone that's identified as not having good performance. I would say that that is tight in this. And the fact that it's, those kinds of things are also being endorsed by the state, in a firmer way is different than what many towns have developed differently, in many different ways across the state. This is more of a model that across the state is being urged to be implemented. It's not required, again, because the obligation is going to be that we have the partners at the table. It doesn't remove any responsibility that we have to actually sit and talk with the teachers and come to a resolution and, both sides ratify, in effect, what is there. Last I saw, there were about 56 school districts in the state that had adopted it just the way it is. And there are another group, lesser, that haven't resolved it yet. They're still negotiating, and, there's some discussion on it. Boston's the most prominent. The Globe's had several articles about the negotiations in Boston, which Boston kind of operates separately from some of the major unions, in the state. And they had other issues, right, that were going on about unresolved contracts over a couple of years now in terms of pay issues and stuff like that. So, I think getting through this in a way that,
Is this what the Chicago thing
I was
is
just gonna
today?
say Chicago too.
It's part of it.
I think it's hard to relate, again, like Boston. Some of the issues that you're dealing with in the bigger urban settings, I think are a lot different than, what we might be confronting in like a Medfield and maybe in a lot of ways across the board. I mean, I go, there's a group that I go in and occasionally go to their meetings called the Pioneer Institute in Boston. When they have they do a lot of things that are related to a number of other areas of government and business and stuff, but when they put on programs around education, I go, because they're actually thought-provoking meetings, but it's a very conservative think tank. And the first couple of meetings I went to, they would be talking about some issue, and there would be like a chuckle that would go through the room about the unions, and there'd be this knowing, oh yeah, that would go through the room. And after maybe being at one or two of their meetings, I went up and talked to the gentleman that actually was the kind of the founder and financial backer of the organization, who's now deceased, and kind of said to him, well, do you think this is the way it is everywhere? And we got us into a pretty long conversation, and I pretty much tried to spell out to him. The last thing that I think about when I come to work in Medfield on a daily basis is, how is the union going to be an obstacle? It's the last thing I think about. I mean, they have a role. Do we agree on everything? No. Do we have disagreements on things that, I wish sometimes that, they just agreed? Yeah, but, in the big picture, I don't think it's the same. I do think that some of the reform issues that are really being driven by a national agenda are some of the issues that are on the table in Chicago. I think, the answer is yes, but I think it's a lot more complex than that. I think that there are many other kinds of issues that they confront in the urban setting that, it's just foreign to us, in terms of trying to understand. So, so I think this is important. I think it's something that is going to be an important issue that we get it resolved, hopefully in a timely manner. And then I think there's going to be a lot of training that needs to go on, that hopefully we can, through the year, work out some way that we can come to an agreement on it, hopefully in a reasonable time frame during the year, but then really spend some time getting everybody up to speed and providing good quality training, not only to the people that are going to be using the system and sorting through, how are they going to manage it. I mean, one of the real issues is my principals are real busy. They're not people that, have a lot of extra time available. And this system, in many ways, is more demanding. And, you know, so that by itself is just an issue of, well, how are we gonna manage that? What are the resources that they're gonna need? We've already started to look at things like software tools that, you know, could allow them to have maybe a more efficient way to, you know, get feedback out, you know, electronically and track it and, you know, make sure that, you know, they're meeting all the requirements and details of the system, where now, even though we use technology for the purposes of the forms and, you know, being able to complete the form and, you know, sending it out electronically to somebody, you know, the amount of paperwork. This envisions a lot more visits. You know, as a system, it expects more, not necessarily as long. Like in the current system, you know, the expectation is usually you would stay for a whole class period. Actually, in our language, in our current agreement, it talks about the idea that it's expected to be at least a 30-minute visit, where for the most part, people will stay for the entire lesson. This system actually sees it as, well, you can do that, but it also envisions a lot more kind of what we would call walk-through visits, where you might only be there for 15 minutes. You see something very specific, and you focus on what, you know, that specific time frame and that skill was, and so forth, and you do that more. You know, to manage that, to give that feedback, to track it, you know, all of that is, you know, frankly, it's gonna be a challenge, you know, for the principals, you know, in terms of how they approach their day and not get sidetracked by the other zillion kinds of things that can come up, really, that, you know, can take your whole day away, you know, that are very important, you know, issues sometimes. So, those are the things I've been thinking about, you know, and I've been talking to my administrators about. Again, it's not, you know, I would say it's not an exclusive list. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we'll be doing, and I try to, you know, with the principals, the two things that I would say to you that I've always tried to do with the principals, and, you know, it's the approach that I've tried to take in certainly the last recent years. It's really, you know, at times with the principals, you know, they'll come in with a list of 15 things. And I know they need to do all 15 things, you know, when we have a goals meeting. You know, I'll basically give them kind of the open door and, you know, come in and talk to me about what you're thinking about. And they end up needing to do those 15 things. But what I've really tried to do is say to them, look at what's really important. You know, what's something that you really want to be focused on? What's something that you really want to impact a change through? And let's talk about those 4 things, or those 3 things. You know, the idea of having a laundry list that on a yearly basis, it's like check it off and, you know, did you really impact in some way something meaningful in terms of something as a significant change, is really what I try to make this process with the principals. And that's how I kind of approach it. I try to think in the big picture, what's something that I think is really important for the future, and is it something that I can really make an impactful change that, you know, makes a difference. And these are some of the things that I think, you know, in different ways, obviously, to me, would have that meaning.
Great, that's a good list. Thank you. That brings us to public participation. It doesn't appear that we have any public that would like to speak, so we'll move on to the FY 2014 budget timetable.
We presented this to you at the last meeting with the idea that you'd have a chance to review it, and I know Charlie would like to see if you're comfortable with the dates that are there, so that he can
Start preparing things for
start
distribution.
things going.
Okay,
Doesn't end.
we've got the public hearing in January that we need to have, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
January 28th.
Okay. Just one? What we've been doing lately? Just one? Yeah.
Then there's warrant committee ones.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, pretty typically over the last few years too, we've tried to organize some sort of a small subcommittee effort with the warrant committee, and was it Chris and, was it,
Well, I was one.
you were one, was it last year?
No.
So it might have been Sue,
I think,
was it Sue Russo?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, so it was
Chris
Sue
said
Russo
he
and Chris
wanted to
then, so,
continue that.
yeah, so I think we, you know, probably in the next meeting, we probably want to talk about subcommittee assignments too, and start thinking about that.
All right, so you need us to vote this, right?
I
If
would
you're
appreciate
comfortable,
it.
it'd be great,
Is
so we
everybody,
can
you guys?
get going.
That
It's hard to think we're just a week into school and we're talking about next
I
year's
know.
budget already.
So I'll make a motion to approve the Medfield Public Schools FY 2014 budget timetable, 2013 to 2014, as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
And that brings us to information sharing and other. Where, who's our student? Does he know that, or she know that?
We believe he does. It's TJ,
Oh,
Gianci?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's actually, I think he's out in the band practice.
Okay,
yeah,
all right, as long
I
as
know,
he's
I
aware.
heard
of
his
it.
name being barked by. Doug Olson.
yeah.
All right, that's fine. Oh, it's in it, don't
So absent his conflict tonight, we
That's fine.
believe he's aware,
Yeah,
so.
okay, all right.
He's a good kid.
Yeah, you do.
Nothing.
Nothing, everybody?
I just have one thing, and it came up the other night at the Meet the Principal meeting with Louise Snyder, which is, and you touched upon it, Bob, is the scheduling at Dale Street. And I know it's tight, the language is added and that sort of thing, but it came up, and a couple of parents had come up to me about the instrument, choosing the violin, the orchestra,
Sure.
that kids are being, in the letter that was sent home, I should preface it by saying, the letter that was sent home about the music, the violin, the orchestra, wasn't that clear. The communication was definitely
Yeah.
lacking in that letter as to what children were going to miss if they chose the violin. You know, it wasn't spelled out that they could be, it just said that they were gonna be pulled out of a class. And so I think a lot of parents had the assumption, myself included, that we wouldn't pull them out of an academic subject, not a math, not, a writing or,
Sure.
something along those lines, that they probably would have been pulled out either during their regularly scheduled music class or something like that,
Yeah.
a special. But then, after further inquiry, we found out that sometimes they would be pulled out of a math
Yeah.
class. So in addition to causing tears at the Sullivan household, it,
Right.
it raised a lot of issues for parents thinking, I didn't know that they were gonna get pulled out of math, like I would know, and I understand music is very important.
Sure.
And I know that the schedule is tight, but I definitely think,
You're definitely learning that it's tight.
I'm learning that it's tight, it's becoming tighter.
Right.
But the discussion has been definitely heated about how we're gonna work, or how,
Right.
what the plan is to work that schedule, because I think there are a number of parents who are upset learning that the children would be pulled out of, potentially in math.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I know
You know,
they,
not just because
and
we
we
have
talked about it
tests.
earlier before the meeting. I know that the principal over the years has really involved the staff quite a bit in trying to figure out the best solution. And as I talked to you before the meeting about probably the most complex issue that I dealt with from like a timeframe that it took me to resolve it as a high school principal here in Medfield was the high school schedule. We actually had a study committee that worked on it for 3 years. And after 3 years of work, going out to look at everybody and how they did schedules and you name it, I had no consensus amongst the high school faculty. And we still talk about it, some of the people that have been around a while. I finally sent out a memo and said, we've studied this for 3 years. We can't come up with a solution that there's a consensus around. I've decided this is the one we're going to do, and I'll give you 3 months. And if you come back with a consensus around another idea, I'll be willing to implement that one. And they're still using the same schedule basically today, from a number of years ago. It really is it's a very complicated issue. And I know that, Kim organized a very thoughtful study group a couple of years ago where they really tried to balance out all of these competing demands, that people want that schedule to do. And one of the things I talked to Louise about coming in the door was, this is an issue that you're gonna need to figure out how to manage as the principal. So, you know, I think, you know, how well it was communicated and all that, we can certainly go back and reflect on. I know it's been something that the school has been struggling with for a good number of years. And, you know, at the same time, there are some folks that are concerned about the aspect of what they might be losing to get this. There are some other people that would just be vehemently upset about the idea that kids couldn't do it. So, you know, there's a lot of tension and balance around that, and, you know, trying to figure it out in a way that, you know, makes sense it's gonna be one of our challenges, you know. And Ray coming in the door, you know, we had the conversation. The language really hasn't complicated it. You know, we actually, the language component went into what was library time. That, you know, and we really were, one of the compromises that occurred in actually implementing the language was around this, right? In some ways, I'd like to have more time, you know, for the language program. But because of the complexities of what was kind of there, you know, we tried to limit it to coming out of what was this previously utilized time for a library. That was a pullout where kids would, you know, go down for library instruction separately. So, you know, it's an issue. You know, it's not a surprise. It's something that they've got to work through. I don't know that it's the thing that they're going to have fixed by tomorrow morning. You know, it's there. It's an issue. You know, the principal's aware of it. And I think it's a lot more complex than, you know, on the surface, any one, you know, opinion might give you. You know,
Right.
it's a pretty complex issue, so.
I was just thinking that if there is some kind of, I just think it would have helped if there was a little bit more information.
Yeah,
to
maybe
the
some
parents,
clarity
some
about what they're
clarity.
doing and how they're trying to manage it.
And if, you know, if you're pulled out for math, you'll have the opportunity to make
Yeah.
up that information either with your parents at home or, you know, so that parents
Right.
have an informed decision that I know
Sure.
I'm gonna take her out to do the violin, but it's worth it to me.
can make
so
that
then
decision.
I'll make it
Sure.
up and go over whatever math
Yeah.
that, and, you know, Mrs. Snyder was she handled it so well.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, kudos to her because it was definitely a hot button issue.
Sure. Well, and it's hard for
was
her
hot
because
button
she's still
issue
trying to
about it,
figure it.
right.
She literally, I mean, she and I talked today probably for 15 minutes about it at one point. And, you know, I was actually asking a couple of pointed questions and she still was, you know, trying to assess the information, you
Right.
know, because, you know, the sense that we've had in the past is they really did try to minimize the amount of time that a child would ever come out of a math or, you know, science,
Right.
ELA, you know, that it was, you know, many times, you know, and again, you know, here's the priority. Well, if it's coming out of social studies, is that okay?
Right.
Right? You know, and the sense is that I've had some parents, from some parents is, well, never math, but if it was social studies, well, that might be okay.
Right.
You know, so there is this little bit of people validating what they see as important. You know, well, maybe music is more important than social studies, but it nowhere, you know, is near important as math, right? So that whole, you know, vision of how people see it, you know, in importance, you know.
Right.
So, you know, it's there, you know, it's something that, you know, she's now really cognizant of, you know, from, I think, that conversation the other night. Not that, you know, I don't think she didn't believe me. You know, it's something that she needed to tackle, but, you know, I think it's something that needs to be worked on, you know, and I think we all are aware of that.
Okay.
You know, the challenge is, I don't know that she's gonna be able to fix it tomorrow. So, you know, whether or not there's something that she can do to just make sure that everybody really understands the choice that's being made in that interim period till they come up with, you know, whatever that plan is going to be. You know, and I can guarantee you, you know, there's some very difficult conversations that need to take place, you know, amongst the staff, because, you know, literally you're talking about time for program. You know, that's the two big issues that we face, you know, really, if you were to pick it out. One is financial, you know, how do we fund things? And then the other big issue that educators have with, you know, we were talking about with evaluation is time. You know, where do you get the time? You know, with all the demands that are there. It's not a new issue. It's been kind of, going on for a while, and they've been trying a lot of different solutions to it, and they get to the point where they think, oh, they've got the solution, and then, well, it's really not, it's been the problem.
Right, that's what I kind of
Yeah.
understood, that it was an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
I think, myself included, there's some spirited parents there that,
Sure.
I just didn't know the message that we were sending when
Yeah.
you tell, I certainly wouldn't let my children skip a class or get, say, oh, you can do that later, you don't have to do that
Right.
now. I'm not sure, it's not the message that I would choose to send, like, oh, you can miss math for a half an hour because, and I know there are some people who are, violinists who would say that that was okay to miss that because you're learning
Right.
something else, so I definitely respect.
Or if you were to
the
eliminate that program,
Right,
because you
right,
can't make it work.
Right,
You might have a different reaction if people thought, oh, that music
Right.
program is being eliminated.
right,
And, there was quite a, and the history on this was, there was quite an effort. When I came into Medfield, really was when some of it was being debated, and I really didn't have a lot to do with the decision-making at the time, but it really was a sense that the music program had really fallen on its, on bad times, and there were literally like 18 kids in the band, and, it was not a pretty picture, and there actually was a very large vocal group that came to school committee meetings, meeting after meeting after meeting, and there was a lot of pressure at that time on the school committee to actually do something to fix it. And a lot of that fix had to do with putting leadership in place, getting programs into the school day. Because one of the solutions that, you and I talked about briefly was, well, you could make it after school. Well, not everybody gets access to it after school. So, there was at one point in Medfield a real push to really drive these programs into the school day. And, now, we're at a different point, and, people are, having different thoughts about, what is the right move with it. It's definitely gonna be something that I think is gonna be a big challenge for her this year.
I'll say, on that point, Debbie and I were on the search committee for that Dale principal, and I know when they went around the table in the very beginning, if you remember the staff, well, that was their whole thing, was about scheduling, and
Yeah.
we need somebody that can handle schedules and scheduling, and I know, speaking for me, I was like, how complicated can it be? But obviously,
It
it's
is.
very
It
complicated.
is.
right.
Well, and it was on the tails of the language conversation, and the fears of how was that gonna complicate, issues at Dale, So, the timing, of some of that conversation was not too far off from, some of the conversation that we were talking about, well, how are we gonna institute this language
They were very
program, and
concerned.
fears of where that was gonna come from, in terms of time.
So the only thing I did mention about the master plan for the Dale Street School, and there is gonna be a booth at Medfield Day about what the plans are, mostly focused on the DPW, because that's the first on the capital plan that needs to be dealt with. And then the capital building committee is going out for proposals for an architect to look at primarily a conceptual design for the police and fire station, which was next on the list, but also to look at it in the context of that whole area and what are the sort of chess moves that need to occur to put, deal with the park and rec and the Dale Street School. So I think you're gonna start to see more about that, should be going out in the next week or two. And then, there'll be some public meetings for people to participate, and, because that approach to a master plan is a very open process, and you try to get a lot of feedback from people about what's the best solution there, so I guess I would just ask people to pay attention. I'll probably talk a bit more about it, when we have our meetings, because it's a key part of that.
I don't have anything, Charlie?
One thing this evening, I found out late this afternoon, I heard from our facility director, Alan Peterson, that he was able to avail himself of a program through Mass Save, which is the energy saving consortia of the local utilities, and he was able to obtain 5 pallets or 6,028 watt fluorescent tubes at no cost. And, the finance guy says, no cost, that's good. The value of these is approximately $12,000. The lamps, again, making some estimates, those should last us between 2 and 3 years. So kudos to Alan for
Yeah.
seeking this program out and getting,
Sure they didn't fall off the back of the truck.
I was gonna say.
well, I said, maybe we could go into the light bulb sale business, and he said, Charlie, I don't think that was ethical. I said, Alan, that was a joke. But, that is obviously good news.
That's great news.
And as there'll be a negligible energy savings associated with these because we're replacing primarily 32-watt with 28-watt bulbs, the lifetime difference and what that means and our cost is fairly small, but saving the purchase price of
Right.
6,000 light bulbs is obviously a nice little thing. So congratulations and thank you to Alan.
One of the things we've been spending some time on lately has been mosquitoes. I don't know if you noticed, but the entire state moved the threat level into what's considered to be a moderate state of concern about West Nile and Tripoli, and it's been perceived as one of the worst years in recent years, although it's been pretty regular in the fall over the last couple of years that we've had to manage a little bit of this. We had a game down in Easton that was scheduled to be a night game on Friday, and Easton is at a different stage than the rest of the state. They're at a critical stage. So we actually had the game moved into a daytime game, which the Department of Public Health has some recommendations on a system that they do to actually track cases where anybody's been ill, but they also do statewide testing on mosquitoes where they trap them and they actually test them. And so Medfield has not had one of those issues yet, but they came out, I think, on this weekend and raised the entire state level to what's considered moderate, which is basically suggesting that, you be aware that you fix screens, that you empty standing water around your home, and use pesticide, application for repellent, I should say. As a precautionary measure, we had the opportunity to work with the local Norfolk County mosquito control, which they will work with communities, and they're real busy right now. They're being called all over the place. They're the people that are doing the aerial spraying that you've been hearing about, but they also do ground spraying. So we did have the opportunity, as well as the town did for some of their area fields and stuff like that, to arrange having a spraying. So Charlie put out a notice that you should have seen in an email that went out. It's actually a generic notice that we're actually required to issue at any point that we're using any kind of a chemical application. And it talks about a 72-hour period in the notice that you receive. That's a generic notice that's required to go out in that form anytime we put anything down. So we actually have some applications that we do on some of the fields that has to do with like herbicide occasionally, or a pest control product on the fields. And we actually try to organize that in a way where the 72-hour period actually happens when we're not around in any fashion. And the 72-hour period is intended to be when it's either a liquid generally or a granular application. And the idea is, you like on your lawn, you probably have a service that comes in and puts down something. We're required by statute to actually give that notice whenever we do this. The material that is being sprayed by this organization is going to happen sometime in the evening, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. period on Thursday.
This Thursday?
Yeah, and that came out in the notice. The reason they do it then is that's when the mosquitoes are thought to be active, so it actually is effective on them. But it's also because this particular product, the precaution on it is you don't want to be in it when they're spraying it, okay? That it really is something that they want to have it done when there's no human activity. That's the precaution, is that you don't want to be in the spray. It's not like the granular stuff that actually when you put it on the ground, it could be there for a couple of days. It actually dissipates pretty much immediately. The gentleman that Charlie talked to today confirmed it's like 15 minutes, and it's dissipated. And they've done a lot of studies. It doesn't leave toxicity on a surface or in the water. It actually is a derivative. It's actually a synthetic compound that's very similar to a compound that's found naturally in chrysanthemums. And it's a very, very low toxicity to humans. So even with people that might be chemically sensitive or might be, asthma, that type of thing, they actually don't have any precaution after it's out there applied, that it's really, you don't want to be in the spray. So it's happening at a time when no one will be in the spray. As far as we understand, they actually said that, if someone was crazy and down at the track at 3 in, they actually wouldn't apply it, when they were there. But given the concern that we have about the seriousness of the disease, we believe this is a prudent action. So the notice is out there. We've had a couple of inquiries, as I've noticed in the news with, where they've sprayed this on whole towns, in some of the more critical areas of the state, and occasionally someone may have, a concern about it. But we think we've done our research, and we believe it's, the safe thing to do. The town Park and Rec does this every year on their field. They have no notice requirements like the school department does, so they actually just applied it
I believe it's last
last Thursday. So it is something that's commonly done, without all of this requirement. But again, the regulations for the school department is very stringent, that we have to, provide this kind of notice, which is fine with us. But I also want to make sure that if you get any questions, you understand what's going on. And
So
And where are you spraying?
Yeah, where,
it's largely around the school field areas,
School field,
adjacent.
rock
So,
fields,
yeah.
All
school-
all
Dale.
5 buildings.
All of,
Yeah.
okay, all of the building.
Yeah.
and what's Park and Rec's fields?
McCarthy.
They did McCarthy Park this Thursday.
Oh, okay, down at high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually, there's a good link on the DEP website that explains all about, what it is. It's actually, it doesn't have to be, a lot of these things, you actually have to be a licensed person to apply them and stuff. There's no special license required. You can actually go to Home Depot and get this for your house, and it's the kind of thing that can be used in a household in a fairly uncontrolled. Again, you wouldn't want to, take the aerosol can and spray it in your face. It is something that a homeowner can get access to very easily and, use in their yard. So, I don't want to downplay that we're being thoughtful about when it's being applied, and, that, we're, trying to think of, it through in terms of it being the reasonable action on our part, because we are concerned, about the possible serious health risks that the mosquitoes pose. And we're, looking at this daily, in terms of the risk factor, and looking at our activities and, how we're running our events and stuff like that. And literally because of where we were with Easton, the game was moved, to a daytime game. So it is something we're constantly looking at. But we think this is a good precaution to take, given the nature of, the type of devastating illness that, if you were to be bit by an infected mosquito. So that's just in case you have any questions or concerns. And then the last thing that I want to mention is we actually have quite a bit going on with our China effort. We had a group of kids that were supposed to be coming for 3 weeks in September. They actually had their visas rejected on 2 occasions by the U.S. government. And I want to publicly acknowledge Senator Kerry's office for stepping in and trying to help us a little bit, because when your visa gets rejected, you're a foreign national, and our government doesn't really feel much of an obligation to tell you why, nor I guess should, or you're not an American citizen. But at the same time, this has been a very good program. So they were very helpful in working things through and being able to get us some information on what went wrong, and at this point, we're working with our colleagues there to rectify it. It appears that the trip for the students here is going to be delayed. They were supposed to arrive around September 22nd. It looks like we're now targeting maybe November 1st.
Oh, wow.
But it looks like we now understand what the issue was, and we're going to be able to resolve it. It wasn't an issue that had to do with any particular person or anything like that. It was more just some of the way that the visa category that they were applying for, which very commonly is approved, in this instance was disapproved. So we've got a solution on that. The other news in this is Robert Parker has been invited to go to Shanghai. Actually, our district was selected to send someone. There's a conference in Shanghai that's part of our Confucius Classroom grant that we've been involved with, and they're actually having a summit there, and the good news is the way they're having it organized is the intent is he'd get to visit our partner schools. So that's an important step. So I think, getting someone else in the district involved in that program. And then out of the program that I went to this summer, one of the things that one of the activities I was invited to go and tour what's really considered to be one of the best high schools in China. I mean, the place is phenomenal. It's a 4,000-student campus, and it's a school that was founded right after the revolution, and many, many very famous Chinese government officials have been to the school, and their kids go to it now. It's a very, very high-powered school that basically sends their kids to the best universities in the world and in China. And so we got contacted this week. They're sending a delegation to the United States, and they want to visit Medfield.
Oh, wow.
So we're hosting 30 folks at no cost. We're going to arrange a day of activity for them. They want to see what we're doing with technology. They're very interested in how do we teach science. They want to see us because they know that we're one of the best public school systems in the United States. So, basically they made an overture to come and take a look, and they're going to be here on October 1st for the entire
So
day.
in that 30, the group of 30, what, are they teachers? Are they?
Yeah, there's
administrators,
some
or-
administrators. They're physics teachers, chemistry teachers, English teachers, and some language teachers. Several administrators. There was someone we couldn't figure out what he does. They actually had someone that's titled a strategic initiatives something or other, and we asked the woman that was in the phone conference, who actually I got to meet when I was there, and she kind of chuckled and said, well, I just noticed that job title today, too. I mean, this is literally, it's a school with 4,000 kids, so they've got a
Or you have
faculty
somebody.
where, this woman who's like the executive assistant to, the headmaster of the international program. They actually have a very large international program of foreign students, and she didn't know who some of the people were, because it's that big of a school with faculty. So, we're excited that, they're interested in coming to Little Medfield, and, that they know us. And, they're not visiting any other public schools while they're here. They're traveling in the Boston area, and then they're heading down to, I think they're departing to go down to the Washington, D.C. area, and they're visiting other public schools while they're here. They're arriving on, I think, the 30th here in the Boston area, and they're departing on the 3rd, I think. And all the time that they're here, they're only visiting private schools, other than us. This is the only public school they're visiting while they're here, so. Yeah.
Very good.
So if I get a chance to, organize something where, maybe come and say hello, I don't know. It's pretty much a school day event. We think they're gonna arrive at like 8 o'clock. We figure they're gonna finish up around 4, so we might do a lunch or something like that. And they're covering all their expenses. So. That's it.
Okay. With that, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?